the conversations that the partnership is initiating about data sharing and use and improving social outcomes are conversations that New Zealanders need to have. And the research that the Data Partnership has commissioned is integral to that discussion and to our growing understanding of how we protect and value that data that agencies hold about us all. I'm looking forward to hearing more about the research that the partnership has been undertaking and to their approach to re-identification. We're delighted to have Dame Diane join us today, and I just want to let you know the session will be slightly shorter than advertised. We'll need to finish at 1:45 so Dame Diane can jump on a plane and head south for her next engagement, but we'll try and squeeze in some questions just near the end, so you can look out for that. Okay, Dame Diane, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak today, and it's a great privilege really to be speaking on behalf of Data Futures Partnership. I have been in the role of chair for almost 18 months, and when I first got the role, I think there was a lot of bewilderment probably about why somebody who ran a food bank is actually in a data role. And one of the reasons that I was chosen to do this was we need to actually start having people who are trusted talking about our data. I think it was probably fortuitous for Data Futures and for the government that I actually am a computer programmer. I'm an analyst, I'm passionate about data, and I have been writing databases and collecting and analysing data since the 1980s, so a really early adapter. So not only am I passionate about changing outcomes for people, I'm also I have a real understanding about the data and the way that we're using it. In the last 18 months, I have, of course, learnt an enormous amount about how data is working in our ecosystem, what we're doing with it, and some of the challenges that we face around this really amazing resource that we have. I was reading this morning an article about how data and oil can be talked about virtually in the same breath. Is that when we had the huge amount of oil and we had oil companies who have monopolies, they started to talk about should the oil companies be broken up, should there be such large monopolies. And there was an article this morning that was saying Google and Facebook, those sorts of companies are monopolies as well, and should we be starting to think about how they work and what are the rules around them. Every time I turn around, there is a article, there's something in the newspapers, there's something on the radio about big data. And I don't think it's because I've sort of got an antenna about it. I think actually it's something that's coming into the public domain and we're talking about more and more and more. The Data Futures Partnership is a group of people who come from not-for-profit, myself, from business, from academic, and we have one person from government, and he's actually my special advisor to make sure that I don't make mistakes with government processes because I'm slightly new to that area. And we are a group, we're very diverse, and we haven't come together just about government data. It seems to me when I'm sitting in Wellington that all anybody ever thinks about is government data, but we've been set up to look at all data in New Zealand, at business data, not-for-profit data, any data that is being collected and used. We have been asked to create a trusted environment about the use of that, so that's part of the job. And it's more than about just privacy, and it's more than about ethics, it's more than about human rights. All of those frameworks we currently have in place, and all of those frameworks at the moment are starting to think about how do we adapt to look at data, because some of the rules around privacy are around your individual rights. When data's being collected about you, when you're not giving permission and you're not giving consent, but it's just part of the process of your everyday walking down the street and having your photo taken or swiping your card when you get onto the bus, or all of those ways that data are collected about you, we need to start thinking about new ways of thinking. What is privacy? And what does it mean for us individually? And what does it mean when we're collecting and using data? The Data Futures Partnership have been tasked to do quite a few things. One is to diagnose and fix all the problems in the system. So we did that in the first week. Look on our website, all the answers are there. The second one was to set up catalyst projects to talk about how we can demonstrate how we can use data to solve real-world problems and what would be the issues around that. So we have catalysts, for instance, with a firm called Experian, who are working with ACC, so we've got private business working with government data. We have not-for-profits sharing data together. You may well have heard about the Data Commons project, which is talking about an alternative way of collecting and owning data. So if we think about stats having a bank of data, there are other people who are thinking about collecting data and having their own data collectives that are the same, but they're an alternative to the bank that we've already got. Is that put properly? It is, isn't it? And so we're looking at setting up a data commons. That's our next step. So there's 18 projects. You can go online. We're just in the process of analysing those. And what are the problems we found? That people don't know how to share data with each other. People don't have good protocols around sharing data. That people's data that they're collecting is not always in particularly good condition. That people don't understand about consent and privacy. That people actually, out of everything, they forget that data is about people. And so when we're talking about data, often we talk about it as if it's some sort of innate thing that we can do what we like with, rather than actually we are collecting things about people and we want to use them for people. At the moment, most of the government focus is around social data, and you will hear constantly the term social investment and using data for social investment. So I'm probably going to be talking a little bit more about that today than the business data and other data. But the social investment model for the government and the way that they want to use data about people who use government services is probably going to give us a prototype for how we can use, what are the rules around how we use data everywhere in the system. So I'm going to focus mainly on that today. Our third thing that we've been asked to do is around social licence, and I'll go through what we've been doing with that in a minute. And the other piece of work is about re-identification. So we'll move on and do about social licence. We were asked to consult with all New Zealanders around social licence. And of course that was slightly more difficult to do than possible. So we have gone out to 27 groups throughout New Zealand, and we've had an online survey that 4,000 people have done. So what is it we're actually trying to do with social licence? Social licence, for those of you who don't know, and I assume most of you do, is really about what do we give permission to have our data used for. What is society's view about what is okay and what is not okay? So if I talked about social licence for divorce in New Zealand, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, a divorce was seen as a terrible thing. The majority of New Zealanders were against it, and the law made it very difficult. You could only, if you'd been abandoned or your husband committed adultery, and then it was printed in the truth to which one they did. And it was really hard to get a divorce. We have changed our opinions about that, and that's social licence. We have changed our opinions about gay marriage. We have changed our thinking about homosexual law reform. Those are all examples of how our social licence as a nation has changed. And we have a few things at the moment that are controversial that we're actually starting to think about. So we need to start thinking about social licence for data. What is it that actually we can and should do with data? Some of you may have been aware of the MSD issue recently, two MSD issues, one where the data was perceived not to have been kept securely, the other one when MSD asked all not-for-profits to give all of the names, addresses of the client, plus the partners' names, addresses, plus all of the children's names and addresses for every piece of work they were doing. And the not-for-profits have come back very strongly and said that's just not on. They didn't get social licence. They legally probably could have done it. There was some debate about under privacy rules whether they could have done it, and the Privacy Commissioner wrote a paper on it. They ethically may have been allowed to do it. They owned the data, but they didn't get social licence, and it was pushed back. So what did we do? We went out and we asked people in a way that's quite different. We set up what we call a game board, and on the side, one side was benefit and the other side is trust. Now we had these as really large boards on the ground, and we gave people scenarios. We said to them, your doctor wants to share your information with other health professionals and surgeons and the ambulance. How do you feel about that? And what we asked them to do was, what benefit or what value do you see in that? And how much do you trust the people sharing the data? And so people would jump on the board and we would find out where they actually stood. So most people, when we said that, went into the sit up the top saying we see high benefit because, you know, if we get to a hospital and they've got their records, that's great. And we trust our doctors. You have no idea how New Zealanders trust their doctors, hugely, and to keep their data safe. We then said, how would you feel if it was de-identified and used by businesses, by the government, by iwi and community groups? But it was de-identified or anonymised. Always have debates about that. And you'd see then they were using smaller boards, and so you'd see where people sat, and then most people went, oh, that's pretty okay as long as my name's not there, as long as nobody can identify me, I'm okay about that. And the third scenario was, how would you feel if all your personal data was shared with everybody? And this is where they stood. In fact, they were off the board. They didn't trust anybody, right? So we did that on health data, we did it on educational data, and we did it on Internet of Things data to check where people's perceptions were. And every time we took photos of the boards, we then did post-it notes from forever about what do people think should be different, what would make them feel safe, what would make them feel okay about sharing data. And we have collated all that research. Just a couple of notes, people trusted health data being shared far more than they trusted educational data being shared. They perceived that teachers were not skilled, not competent, and not able to share data, that the data could be misused, that a kid who was truant in their early life because of family circumstances and then did a U-turn and changed and became a good student would be disadvantaged when they went to get a job because that data would be available. So there was a lot of mistrust about educational data, a lot of trust about medical data, and some very mixed reviews about the Internet of Things because people didn't really understand it that well. So we were able from that to find out then what people thought should happen. And I think we can go to the next one. And what came out of that is some emerging things. We have been charged with writing the social licence guidelines for New Zealand. So in future, if people want to use data for a particular project, you may well think that you look at the privacy rules, you look at the human rights rules, you look at the ethics around it, but then you think about the social licence, because you might pass all of those ones and still not be able to do the piece of work that you want to do if you haven't got social licence. So what did people tell us that they want to know about data being used? They want to know what it's being used for. Specifically, what is my data being used for? It's not that difficult, but actually people find that really hard to define, and MSD are going through this at the moment, trying to really define what they want data for. They want to know what value there is. So yeah, I can see why you're doing it, but what am I going to get out of it, and what are you going to get out of it? No? They want to know, when is it going to be used? Is it going to be reused without their permission? They want to know who's allowed, who has control of it, and control and security may be similar sorts of things. One of the things that people really want, and I think it's something that just keeps popping up all the time, is people want access to their data to check that it is correct. They want the right to be able to ensure that their data is correct. And if you think recently in the newspaper there was a man who, I'm having a wee knock of MSD at the moment, I really don't mean to. I think Child, Youth and Family actually. Child, Youth and Family wrote down somewhere that he was a sexual perpetrator and he had been in jail. And it was not true. He could not get that off his record. And although people in the office told him that it had been changed, it had not been changed. And it has basically destroyed his life. There's no, even now that, it's been acknowledged that it's not true, it's been taken off his record, he now has access to his children. It has cost him enormously through the courts. It has fundamentally destroyed his life because he didn't have the right to access and see that the record had been changed, and the agency did not have a process for actually taking a complaint, showing how they were going to resolve it, and proving that they had resolved it. So people really are concerned about control. Okay. Security, who's going to keep it, where's it going to be kept, how do I know? People are not as paranoid about the fact that there will be breaches or problems or things like that. They know that nothing is 100%. And they know that there is human failings in systems. What they don't like is that when there is a human failing or is there a system breach, that frequently government departments and people stand back and they won't take responsibility and they won't talk about how they're going to fix it, and they're not going to talk about how they'll make it better in the future. So there needs to be a really good process around that. Transparency, and one of the things about Privacy Week this week is around transparency. It's an interesting word because it means different things to a lot of people, and we've spent a lot of time trying to pull that out. And in fact, transparency is about being able to see the purpose, value, use, control, security. The other thing that New Zealand has told us, they want some form of governance over their data. They want to know, where do you go if something is wrong? Where do you find out where the standards are? Where do you find out how the framework is kept? And there is a debate at the moment around whether, in fact, in the same way we have a Privacy Commission, we have a Human Rights Commission, whether in fact we need a Data Commission that actually is responsible for all data in New Zealand. And that's a very, very early iteration of the debate at the moment. So those are the things that people asked us for. Yep. Okay. People were very sceptical that we would anonymise data and it could be kept anonymised. People have long memories. ACC breach, the Kinos breach is MSD, sorry, MSD. The more involved people were with government, the less they trusted them. Their experiences said, we don't trust you, you don't look after our data properly, you're not honest about how it happens, and actually the majority of that is that the data is used negatively against them, and so they're really concerned. Interestingly enough, the people who were most concerned about algorithms and the use of data were the homeless population of Auckland, and they were really worried that algorithms would be used to determine whether they'd get parole or not. And they asked questions such as, they could see how that would work, but how would the human part be put in as well? So the comment would be, Diane, last week I found God and I've turned my life around. So how's the parole board going to see that if I've got just an algorithm deciding whether I get parole or not? And I think it's an interesting thing, is how do we combine our human understanding with the data that we're getting as well? Because each by itself is not enough, but putting them together is really important. People think that public good becomes before profit. And people were very sceptical of business. It was a really interesting thing, really sceptical of business, but then sign over to Facebook and Google and everybody. So if they think they're going to get a benefit, they sign up very quickly. But this was genuine engagement. What it demonstrates is that you actually need to actually think about, if you're having a data use, You need to have that public engagement to see what is going on. You can't get social license to do anything you like for whatever you like. You need to get social license for particular pieces of work. You know, recently we had a plan to actually, or somebody developed an algorithm that would determine what children would get abused in New Zealand or not. And it had ethics, it had privacy, it had human rights sign-off, it had consultation with Maori, and it didn't get out the gate. And it came up in big headlines, we won't use New Zealand children as lab rats. Okay, so we can do it. Should we do it? Will the public let us do it? Is actually really important. So if you want to do something that's different, that you want people to understand what it is that you're using their data for, we need to start thinking about how does this public engagement come. And I would dare say that just about everybody I'm seeing at the moment is putting stakeholder engagement. So they're looking, we'll have stakeholder engagement, we'll have a meeting. This is different. This is real engagement. It's not just having a meeting and telling people what you're doing. It's actually finding ways to engage, to let people really understand and to think about it. And it's amazing how they'll come. A really interesting thing around this, we get told continuously that older people are very technologically, they struggle with it, and that young people are technologically savvy. Older people are data savvy, they are information savvy, they have experienced things in their lives and they know how things can be shared, and that data, actually the information about yourself, it can be a thing you want to keep private. If you've got Hep B, or you're HIV, or you've had an abortion in the health system when you're 17, do you want that going forward with you in the future? So older people who've experienced life events think about that, and they think about it for their children and their grandchildren. Younger people, technically savvy, have no idea who they're giving their data to. And they don't think that in 10 or 15 years' time, or even now, go and do a job interview, and what's the first thing an employer does now? Looks up your Facebook profile. And so we need to actually make young people far more data savvy and think about what the future will be for them. Okay. So what does it mean for driving trusted data? We do need to always look at it's more than privacy, it's more than human rights, it's more than ethics. And there are people at the moment who are getting frameworks for those things around data so that we can actually see what the framework is, what the principles are. But that social license is actually a huge part. If we don't have social license, then we're going to really strike problems with our data use. It's about seeing what the value is. And actually, what we want to do is release the value of data. You know, there's so much there, there's so much we can do, and making sure that all of New Zealanders understand that. Looking at inclusion, and control, and trust. And trust is a big one. People will trust us if we show purpose and value and control and use. And at the moment, we're in a somewhat environment where we are not trusted particularly. We have trust around our human rights, we have trust around our privacy, but we do not have trust around how our data is being used. And so that's a really important thing that we need to do. The second piece of work that we are, this is going to be released by the end of June, so we're just about finished our first draft. We'll be going around departments and people giving them the draft and asking for feedback. And eventually it should be that there is a product that you can just have that says online you can just go value, and then there'll be a series of things that you can do to find out how you can check on value. It'll be purpose, and you'll be able to check underneath of it, how do I go about finding purpose, what do I need to do, what questions will I need to ask. So the whole framework will be there that will make it really easy to find out that you're actually getting social license. A second really large piece of work at the moment is around re-identification. And one of the really big things around the re-identification piece of work is that actually we do not have a common terminology for data. I think it's a real problem when we're having conversations with people. It's a conversation with politicians that gets really difficult. We confuse the term of identifying people with re-identifying people, with anonymised, with de-identifying. And until we get a common terminology around those terms, we are going to struggle with what is the meaning of each particular thing. It's certainly come up for us in looking at the piece of work on re-identification, is that the first step is to make sure we understand what we mean by re-identification, what are the issues. One of the things that we've been asked to do is to recommend whether we should have legislation around the use of data if somebody re-identifies a piece of data that has previously been de-identified. Should there be a punishment about that? Should there be rules around that? We are looking to see whether, in fact, some of our legislation, for instance, the privacy legislation which is being reviewed, the stats legislation that's being reviewed, and some of the justice legislation will actually cover data breaches, re-identification of data, or whether we need a large piece of legislation, which is what Australia has rushed in and done, and now finding that it's tripping them up for using data. So we are just working our way through it. I'm not going to give the definitive results of that. We've got a draft paper going to the Minister in the next week or so, and then we will be putting that out for public consultation. But one of the things we think that's really important for all of us is to actually make sure that we understand the terminology and the subject we're talking about, because we also need to be talking to the public with the same terminology. And so if you're working in the data area, you might want to think about that, and as we come out with our terminology and our definitions, and we're with stats talking, we're with the Privacy Commissioner talking about it, and seeing if we can actually, at the government level, get some agreement about what we are talking to ministers about, and then how do we use data. Our job is to find the best value out of data. We do spend a lot of time talking about risk, and we all in the community talk about the risk of data all the time and the risk of doing things, and we all in our organisations keep risk registers, and I don't know that anybody's keeping a value register. And if you think about people wanting to trust the use of data, you have to demonstrate the value, and then how people see you in terms of trust, that's when you can put your risks and your mitigation about it. But if your value is much higher than the risks, people will actually be prepared to actually give you their data and have it used. We're in a new era. It's like oil. It's probably running faster than oil, and all the rules and legislations we have around oil become suddenly outdated. We are chasing behind in a way. Technology is just speeding ahead of us, and from a legislation point of view, from a social licence point of view, we're running like crazy to catch up and to get New Zealand to understand that we have this amazing resource. We're a small country. We can use our data to make enormous changes and to have enormous growth, and that it is just pure liquid gold, but that we need to make sure that we use it in a safe environment where every citizen's rights are protected. Okay, thank you. Now I'll leave you to have some questions if you want some questions about it.
There's a little bit of time for
Yes.
questions. So.
Yep. Yes, sorry.
Thank you for that. I've got a question. What did you mean by avoid the deficit approach? Avoid a deficit.
It's about more about what would be wrong. At the moment we have a deficit approach for social investment. So people see that all the data that's collected is about going to jail, failing in school, and so people are getting quite angry, and Maori in particular are getting angry about that everything is collected on the deficit model, not collecting on what works and what happens and what good things are happening. So trying to avoid that. So if you were talking, and we talk to homeless people and people who, we talk to all sorts of people, and the homeless people are saying, so when are you going to start collecting data about the things we do well? Yeah?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we are a very deficit-driven model for that. Just a note in terms of businesses and social licence. Businesses actually probably have an inherent understanding of social licence, because if you get it wrong, you don't have a business. You know, if you're doing something that people don't like or they don't agree with, they can actually walk, they can go because they have alternatives. But if you're talking about government data, there's nowhere else to go. So it's important for us to start getting up to speed and getting some rules around that as well.
Sorry, somebody else?
It's just off the back of Catherine's question actually about the deficit. I guess that feeds into what the value is.
Yes.
Completely. I love the idea of the value register. Do you have some ideas of what it is you're looking to do? What value you are looking to identify in the data? Where are we going with that?
Well, I think actually, if you think of data as a big thing, it's not. It's like you're going to data can be used for so many. You can have the same piece of data used for a whole lot of different things.
Yeah.
You need to determine what the value proposition is for yours. And see, that was the interesting thing for MSD is they asked for all the data to come in. They never said how we're going to use it. They just said we're going to use it to improve services.
But then aren't we doing the same by saying we're going to collect a bucket of data and then other people are going to work out what the value proposition is?
No, you should be working out what the valuable proposition is and what the minimum viable product is, what data you need to collect to do it. At the moment, we're just going saying there's a big pool, let's just sift through and see what we can get.
So we do that, but
Yeah.
the Data Futures Forum, if we're looking for a data commission,
Yeah.
that's just providing guidance as to how to do it, as opposed to you're not looking to actively collect
No,
data.
no. If there were a commission, and that's a
it wouldn't be a body.
it wouldn't be a body controlling the data. It would be the principles and the
Right.
governance stuff of data, I think.
Yeah.
But that's very much up in the air at the moment, and some real polarity about whether we need it or not.
Yeah.
Sorry, my point was related to that, and it's really the issue that you can't really assess what benefit you're going to get until all the inputs have been collected, and you might have a whole lot of disparate bits of data, each of which is of very little value, and you won't know the overall value until those have been all combined. So it's very difficult at the beginning
Yep.
to know what it is that you're going to be able to
Yep.
find, and that's why I was quite attracted to your idea of a data commission.
Yep.
Somebody who would license or at least give some kind of authorization to say, all right, as long as you've got some safeguards, give this a try, and then if it works, perhaps we can make that into a long-term model.
Yep. And I think that the point is, in terms of social license, yes, you've got all this data, you're finding this out. What are you going to use it for? So if you have a use, because otherwise you're just in the sea having a good look and it's nice. If you have a use, when it comes to the use, that's going to impact on humans somewhere. And that's when you need to go and get social license. You're not asking them what data to collect. You might be telling them what you've collected. You might be telling them what we've found and go, I've got all this data and what I can see is there's a whole risk prediction model here. How would you feel about that being used? What would be your concerns around that? How could we mitigate your concerns? Okay, so it's not saying you can't just delve in and have a look and see what you've got. It's then you can't just go out and use it in any way that you think's okay. Yeah.
So I think the risk and value framing is really helpful, and when people have spoken about open data, they're probably implicitly talking about very low risk
Yes.
data.
Absolutely.
So what stats collects and makes available, I mean, you could analyse it within the same framework, but typically that's not going to have any risk to a particular individual.
No.
And when you're in that low risk end, maybe you don't need the same governance and safety mechanisms to say this is how to correct it. You know? Creative Commons is a good model. You can throw some things open and see what people do with it.
Yeah.
But that's not where the concern is.
No. But then you still have to figure out who's going to use it and how. So you have a governance model over that about how it's going to be used. The reality is, more and more we are going to be combining data, and we have the technology to get data. So if you talk about a firm like Experian, who is a credit firm overseas, and here they do consumer stuff, they can pick up data from a whole lot of sources, then match it with your Facebook profile, and then get your telephone number, and you're highly identified. Okay? And so we're not talking just about the low risk, safe stuff that we've got. We're talking about how technology is changing that, And a really good example on Facebook recently, when they went through and picked up words about young people who looked depressed and then started targeting advertising at them. You know, should that have, it didn't get social licence because it got pulled very, very, very quickly. So in a sense, they did it and then it got closed down. There's been a few things with Facebook have been closed down by public opinion recently. Is that, yep.
Yeah.
I'm moving to it. Any other?
When you were asking people about basically that creepiness matrix, did you get any sense of sort of divided up by information that people give more or less willingly, and information that people either are required or forced to collect, or really can't legitimately say no, like, you know, the information when you sign up to WINS, you could say no, but then you don't get it.
Yeah. No, we didn't ask. I mean, we assume in terms of government data, everybody understands that you haven't really got a lot of choice, that you need to give it. So I think people really understood that. I think it's more about use. It's not about, everybody knows the data's all there and collected. It's about use, how it's being used and what it's being used for. We didn't do any education with these groups. We didn't make any comments. There were times when our tongues were firmly being bitten, when, you know, and we let the people in the group actually say, well, I went to the GP and my records went to the hospital, but nobody read them and they chopped off the wrong leg anyway. And so everybody would move up the board and down the board, but actually that's part of the stuff of having a conversation with New Zealanders. And then somebody else would say, well, my mother had a stroke last week and when she got there, they were waiting for her and everything was in place and they did the magic hour and they couldn't have done that if that data hadn't been shared, so everybody sort of shut down. And then so you had the polarity, and then you had people in the middle, you had people who didn't care, and then we just let them have the conversation and move themselves. But we didn't intervene and tell them what they should think or try educating people. We were trying to find out where New Zealanders sat on that, and then from a very pure point of view, really, how did they feel about us? You know, about how it would go in the future and what would the social licence guidelines look like.
Did you think doing it in groups was a way of influencing people though? I mean, you just give it a
Well, it does, but you know, that's part of what's going to happen around social licence.
Yeah.
If you talk about medical cannabis, euthanasia, you know, and my husband 2 years ago was so anti-medical cannabis. And it's the conversations with people, it's watching YouTube, it's having a friend with a terminal illness. And now he's the great advocate for it. You know, so actually that's how we change our opinions, that's how the world works. So, and people are going to get it from the media, they're going to get it from each other. And so it's a really good way of seeing how people's opinions were formed, what information did they need in the future, how could we run them. With people, interestingly enough, people were very reluctant to come to a data workshop. We never were able to close down after 2 hours. We just couldn't stop people talking. They just buzzed over this, you know?
I'm interested in the low trust, high benefit end of the spectrum on the matrix, and I just wondered if you had any observations for things like loyalty cards where people might distrust a business but willingly share their information because they're going to get products.
Yeah. Well, they do that for Facebook and they do it for Google and they do it for their telephone, so the value is seen higher than the risk. Part of it is because New Zealanders haven't had a conversation about what's happening with their data. When you actually say to somebody, and I have this, because people say, what do I do? And I go, talk about data, and then eyes glaze over and I go, imagine my Fitbit is tracking my heart and my health and it's connected to my GP in the hospital. And I'm out running and I have a heart attack or I start to, and it buzzes me and says, you need to get to A&E now, we're waiting for you. And I go, oh, that's great, you know, just wonderful benefits. But on my way, my insurance company cancels my insurance. Because it's also got my data. Yeah. So those are the sorts of things that we need to be thinking about. And so that's a really good way of explaining to people what it is I do.
Well, look, I'm
You're
conscious.
aware?
Yeah, just conscious your time's evaporating. So
I'm really sorry. I've got a speaking engagement in Wellington, and I have a plane to catch at 2:00. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you
And
very
we'll
much
leave you
indeed
with questions
for
and things.
coming along, especially on your birthday.
I know.
All day. If you've got a couple of minutes, it's not only Privacy Week this week, it's also the launch of a new NGO for New Zealand. So I want to just allow Professor Gihan Gudasekara from Auckland University Business School just to give us a tiny
Have you got the
update.
slide up? Or?
We do, we'll just get to that. But
It's also Tech Week.
is it Tech Week as well?
And sign language.
Thank you. Well, I've got a captive audience, I guess, before you all rush off. Thanks to Annabelle and Charles and the Privacy Commission for allowing me this opportunity. I just want to start off by saying I want to congratulate Dame Diane and the Data Futures for the excellent work they do in trying to think about what new rules we need for this brave new world. We have to make new rules for this environment. And so part of that is of course engaging with the community, and a group of us for a while have been thinking of setting up an NGO for New Zealand because Australia has one, the UK has Privacy International, the US has the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So a group of us have decided to set up, and we have launched on Monday, the Privacy Foundation New Zealand as an incorporated society. The chair of the foundation is Marie Schroff, who many of you will know is the previous Privacy Commissioner. I am the deputy chair, and our committee has people from right across the country: Catherine Dalziel, Catherine Evans, Alex Sims, my colleague at the University of Auckland Business School. She is on our committee. And our treasurer is Alida Van Klink, who is a chartered accountant with Walker Wayland. So we've got lawyers, accountants, academics on the committee. But what I wanted to say to you was this foundation, please go to the website. It's all one word, privacyfoundation.nz, and you can sign up. And we are really, really wanting to recruit people, because we don't think privacy is just for experts and lawyers and specialists. Privacy is for everyone in the community, which is why we set up this organization. We want to get input from people from all areas of life, whether it's education, health, just ordinary people who are interested in and concerned about, because there's obviously a great deal of concern about what this data is being used for, and the new technologies that impact on us. There's areas of risk. We sit outside the Privacy Commissioner's office. Obviously, we're not doing that job, but we will advocate, and we will make submissions on policy. If we think that a policy is not there, is not effective, there's a gap in the existing framework, then we can lobby for it. And we're asking people, please, not only to join, but to help us to campaign for what they think is important, and tell us what people think is important, what is important to you. We will then, if we think it's an issue that is of widespread concern, the Privacy Foundation will take that on board and campaign for it. So the subscriptions are set very low. I think it's $40 annual and $300 for lifetime membership. We're also looking for corporate donors. So we need funds to be able to fund our activities. So if your organization is prepared to do that, we will acknowledge you as a sponsor on our website. So please check the website out. And that's about all I wanted to say. So thanks again for the opportunity. Were there any questions? Yes.
Yeah. Do you have corporate memberships?
Yes, that's a very good question Annabelle asked. We do allow corporate memberships, and I can't remember offhand. I think it's $500 for annual membership. So corporates are encouraged to join, but also separately to make donations to us. The website is all the information you need, and you can sign up directly through the website, and then go on our mailing list. So please check out the website and consider joining if you are interested in our activities. That's all. Thanks again for the opportunity.